NFL's free agency frenzy is here, and we're bringing it all down for the impact on fantasy football. That's a lot of F's. Here's another one. Michael Fabiano, SI senior fantasy football analyst. So, Fabs, let's get to it because we have a group of players that are sticking with their original teams or the teams that we saw them play on in 2020. And then we have some players that are joining some new teams. Let's focus for now just on the players that are sticking with their squads. That's Jameis Winston and Aaron Jones.
Kind of surprised about Aaron Jones, right? When they didn't tag him, I thought he was gone. And now he's there on a 4-year deal, so he'll spend the rest of his prime seasons with the Green Bay Packers. Coming off a campaign with a career best over 1,100 rushing yards. He missed 2 games last year, and he's going to end up being a top 15 pick once again. He's been a top 5 fantasy running back in 2 straight seasons. So I think Aaron Jones' value is not really going to change too much. Where things change is with A.J. Dillon. And if you are a dynasty leaguer and have A.J. Dillon on your roster, well, you're not a happy camper at this point because you thought there was a chance he'd be the lead guy. Now it's going to be somewhat of a committee. And I think Aaron Jones is going to lead that committee. A.J. Dillon will come in and play the role of Jamaal Williams in terms of the touches. But how is that going to shake out? Well, he is not much of a pass catcher. He had 2 targets on 97 offensive snaps last season. So he could steal some goal line work, some early down work from Aaron Jones, but ultimately Aaron Jones is in a good spot to maybe catch 50 or more passes next season. So Aaron Jones, top 15 pick. A.J. Dillon probably will come off the board middle to late rounds as a guy that's either a really good handcuff or someone you stash and maybe use if Aaron Jones misses any time due to injuries.
And then we have Jameis Winston, who's going to stick in New Orleans. Now, kind of a quarterback competition because Drew Brees retired. They re-signed Taysom Hill. They re-signed Jameis Winston. What's going to happen with Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, and some of these Saints playmakers if we don't know who the quarterback's going to be yet?
On the surface, I don't love this move. I always wanted Jameis to go to, say, Washington or Denver, for example, or maybe Carolina. But now he's staying in New Orleans. We know this offense is conducive to quarterback scoring fantasy points. Drew Brees was one of, if not the greatest of all time from a fantasy football perspective. But this isn't even Winston's job. Like, I've talked to Saints beat writers who say, yeah, if I had to pick week 1 starter for the Saints, it's Jameis Winston, but he's got to beat out Taysom Hill. And Taysom Hill had 4 games under his belt as a starter last year, and he was pretty good from a fantasy perspective. A lot of it had to do with what he can do on the ground. But even if Winston is the starter, he's looking over his shoulder at Taysom Hill. They love Taysom Hill in New Orleans. Sean Payton has a man crush, let's just say, on Taysom Hill. And even if Jameis is a starter, how much are we going to see Taysom Hill? So I feel like at this point, Winston's probably a low-end QB2 with some upside. And if he takes a hold of that job, well, suddenly this is a guy who could potentially put up big numbers with Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas, as you mentioned, in the mix. But we're always going to have to worry about the presence of Taysom Hill in that Saints quarterback room because this is going to be a competition. And Jameis Winston, despite re-signing with the team, is not guaranteed to be the starter in week 1, although we think he's the favorite at this point.
Let's move over to some free agents that are with new teams in 2021. Let's stick with quarterbacks. How about Ryan Fitzpatrick joining the Washington football team? Good fit, do you think?
I like this. Listen, Fitzpatrick, he's going to be 45, and he's going to be playing for another team. This is his 9th team, right?
Yeah.
And last year, he averaged almost 19 points per game with the Dolphins. Like, he was pretty good. Remember, we were all disappointed from a fantasy standpoint when Tua Tagovailoa took over because Fitzpatrick was playing very well. And in the previous season, Fitzpatrick played very well. Now you put him in Washington, I think he's the clear-cut favorite over Taylor Heinicke to be the starter in week 1. You got Terry McLaurin. You got Logan Thomas. Antonio Gibson. J.D. McKissick. You got some nice options. So Fitzpatrick is certainly going to be drafted into QB leagues and Superflex leagues. In traditional fantasy, he's probably a late-round pick at best regardless, right? Because you know Fitzpatrick is going to have a couple of those implosion games where he has 1 touchdown and 4 picks. It's going to happen. But I like the fit. The opportunity is going to be there. And once again, Ryan Fitzpatrick goes to a team where he's going to get a chance to start and see very significant snaps under center. So that's big. And then when you go back to a guy like Corey Davis, who used to play, who's going to play with a team in the New York Jets that Fitzpatrick used to play for. Davis is now, at least on the surface, the number 1 wide receiver for Gang Green. Last year's coming off a career campaign, didn't have 1,000 yards, but he was a top 30 fantasy wide receiver. He's going to be playing alongside Denzel Mims, Jamison Crowder. I don't think there's a lot of room for statistical improvement for Corey Davis. I think at best he's going to be a wide receiver 3 in fantasy. But here's the question, Bill. Who's his quarterback? Is it Sam Darnold? Is it Justin Fields? Is it Zach Wilson? Is it somebody else? We're not sure at this point. So the fit is more of a lateral move for me. I don't think Corey Davis is going to emerge as anything more than a wide receiver 3. And the Jets have a lot more work to do on the offensive side of the football in terms of adding talent either via free agency or in the NFL draft.
The last free agent, let's just quickly touch on. I don't think it has a big impact for his fantasy value. That's Carlos Hyde going to the Jaguars, but it might have a little bit of an impact on James Robinson, who fantasy managers loved as a rookie.
This is a great decision from a fantasy football perspective by Urban Meyer, who brings Carlos Hyde back, right? He was his coach at Ohio State, so they have a relationship. And Carlos Hyde's not coming in and stealing a massive workload from James Robinson. Like, there were other better free agent running backs out there, right? Chris Carson, Kenyon Drake. I mean, there's a long list. They went with Carlos Hyde, who is a little bit long in the tooth from a running back perspective. So this is great. If you are a dynasty leaguer and you have James Robinson, you love the fact that Carlos Hyde is going to be his backup, because that's what he's going to be, a backup. Yeah. He's not going to put a dent into James Robinson's touches, and that's huge.
All right, we'll follow along with more NFL free agency news, and Mr. Michael Fabiano will have all of the impact on how it affects fantasy football. You can check it all out. Go to si.com/fantasy.